This is Radio Ukraine International with the weekly program Doing Business, hosted by Rodion Zhiznievsky and produced by Konstantin Lavrentyuk. Doing Business covers current economic developments in and concerning Ukraine and gives topical information as well as immediate and longer-term economic forecasts. It is what we think might give you food for thought and help you see Ukraine through the economic angle. Yalta European Strategy, yes, is a leading forum for discussing Ukraine's European future and global context. Yes fosters new ideas, connects Ukraine to international partners, supports forces for change in the country and builds networks of supporters for a new Ukraine worldwide. For over 15 years, YES has initiated dialogue between leaders from Ukraine, the EU, the US, the Russian Federation and beyond. Within Ukraine, it provides a platform for the government and opposition. It brings together leaders from politics, business, media, civil society and the expert community. The Yalta European Strategy YES, in partnership with the Victor Pinchuk Foundation, holds a new format event, YES Brainstorming, which focuses on post-COVID steps to survival. A new format discussion, YES Brainstorming, is an exclusive interactive conversation from Ukraine's most promising leaders of today and tomorrow, with some of the world's most acclaimed thinkers. The new brainstorming format has been designed to offer more interactivity with participants, encourage to ask questions and start a dialogue, allowing for a more intense and less formal conversation that is open, substantial and fascinating. The agenda focused on global risks, such as climate change, future pandemics and the potential fallout from technical disruptions, as well as challenges for the international order and how to overcome such threats and leverage the opportunities available to the humankind. The first day of the Yalta European Strategy YES Brainstorming, themed post-COVID pre-disaster steps to survival, was opened by Victor Pinchuk, who called on global leaders to listen to Ukraine in order to prevent future disaster.
We meet our friends, but will we really beat COVID? Will we beat other main threats which are much bigger? Post-COVID equals pre-disaster is the title of our meeting, our brainstorming. We are not yet post-COVID, but we are for sure pre-disaster. Much worse is coming. Climate change, technological disruptions, severe pandemics, maybe even major war. You know, of course, COVID is a deadly tragedy, but compared with what's ahead, then it looks like a training camp, like test run. The main threats are global. We can address them only if humanity cooperates. Can we do it? For me, this is the main question for our meeting. This is also the main question for humanity, because it's not at all sure that humanity will learn lessons from COVID, work together and survive. And yes, I'm talking about survival because I am sure the existence of Homo sapiens is on stake. And look on this guy. By the way, this is very important masterpiece of famous British artist Mark Twain, and looks like he agrees with me. He is also worried about extinction. Now you can ask me a very reasonable, logical question. Why we are talking here in Kyiv about global threats? From my point of view, there are three important reasons for that. First, Ukraine and Kyiv is a regional intellectual hub. I will explain what I mean. The pandemic showed there is much talk about global cooperation, but frankly speaking, we don't have real, strong, deep global cooperation. And if we want to have at least chance for this global cooperation, we have to start serious global conversation, because mainly politicians are busy with the crisis of today. But we have to talk today about global threats of tomorrow, until not too late. And for this global conversation, we need intellectual hubs all around the world. And this conversation, this global conversation, is just beginning. We, with you who got together, think, debate, brainstorm with some greatest minds in the world, and brilliant young Ukrainians were among pioneers of this conversation to prevent global disasters. Ukraine, as intellectual regional hub, has great chance to contribute substantially to this global conversation to prevent global disaster. Second, Ukraine has the moral right to be a motor, a key participant of this global conversation to prevent global disaster. Because we have something to say. Ukraine suffered more main disaster during past 100 or so years than any other country in the world. 2 world wars, Hitler and Stalin, Holocaust and Volodymyr, nuclear disaster, and finally war in the center of Europe since 2014. We know disaster personally as a few on the planet. Ukraine must participate and deserves to be listened to in this global conversation to prevent global disaster. And finally, third reason. For me, all reforms in Ukraine, additionally to making Ukrainians happy and give them good life, have to have in the end one goal: to make Ukraine able to contribute to addressing global threats. Period. From the creation of YES in 2004, we said and showed Ukraine is not only integral part of Europe's history, but also is an important part of Europe's future. And in this post-COVID and pre-disaster world, it's clearer than ever what must be Ukrainian path. Reform yourself and be able to contribute to this global anti-disaster efforts. Then you are part of the future, then Europe and the world will need you. We will be not the ones who ask, but the ones who are being asked.
You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business. Addressing during the first session of the YES Brainstorming, the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, confirms he has no regrets over taking leadership despite the global and regional challenges his nation faces. The session was a broad-ranging discussion in which the President gave his opinion on the challenges the world faces post-pandemic. Ukraine's relationship with Russia, the US, Europe and China, and the path of his presidency.
I think that the main message of COVID-19 is not about increasing biosafety, development of medicine, or growing resiliency in business. Every doctor will tell you that you have to go to the root causes, not to the symptoms. And this is, to me, the main cause for COVID. We'll always be facing new threats, new infections, new bombs, because the world is still competing for influence, for new markets, for being able to influence the policies of other states. Nuclear information, biological weapons is what the world is striving for because it means power. But in this case, new viruses will crop up every year, like new iPhones, COVID-21, 22, 23, then we'll have new brands, new vaccines available through, chargers that come with every iPhone, not compatible with other makes. I'm not a doctor, I won't be able to diagnose the situation, but I feel that the world will not develop this herd immunity because everyone is for himself. We are talking coherence and unity to resolve the challenges of climate, war, poverty, but they seem to be all just declarations because you can see the world united in Facebook, where everyone supports Australia during fires or the United States during floods, when everyone expresses sympathies for Afghanistan or Ukraine against whom Russia is waging its war, but it's not real reality, it's virtual reality. And real reality, yes, the Yalta European Strategy has been convened in Kyiv because Yalta is still occupied, and we do not know whether there is will around the world to restore the status quo. The main lesson of COVID-19 to me is that unfortunately everyone is for himself. Well, the world wants to act together to resolve the challenges of climate change or nuclear weapons, but we will see that equality is one thing and distribution of vaccines takes another path. Most people in the world have passports and citizenship, but it seems that there are lives who are more important than other lives. And that's the value or price of smaller nations that are not members of G7 or G20 clubs. And COVID finally stated what top-notch politicians say. This is your place, and smaller nations have fewer chances of survival if the world is hit by other bigger problems, and it's not a fact at all that someone will come to their rescue. Nations aren't equal, and COVID has shown that in a very striking manner. And at the same time, it has also demonstrated that it can make everyone's equal, whether you possess nuclear weapons, what your GDP is, and told the world, you are all the same, so please unite, because new lessons are going to be even more tragic. Is it a catastrophe? Not yet, but unless the world understands that, we will see the war of everyone against everyone else. Do we need that? No, the world does not need new viruses, new lockdowns, or new vaccines. The world needs leaders who base their actions not upon the force of weapons they possess, but the force of their words, understanding, and will. The will to change the world, to create new reality and do away with the worlds in this day and age before the war puts this world to an end, to its end. Thank you, citizens of a big and independent nations.
Mr. President, thank you very, very much indeed. Let's talk about your biggest friend, perhaps your most important friend, the United States. Ukraine has to be aware of what's happening in other parts of the world. You must have watched very carefully what Joe Biden did in Afghanistan. He walked away from a strategic commitment to Afghanistan, and we see the result. The Taliban are in power. That clearly is something you in Ukraine have to think very carefully about. The United States' willingness to walk away, Joe Biden's determination to focus his efforts and political resources at home. Do you worry that what the US is now doing has implications for Ukraine?
Thank you. First off, it seems to me there are many smart people around. Taliban, you said, came to power after Biden has withdrawn from Afghanistan, but I'd say that Taliban came to power much earlier than that. You can't lose all your territory, so to speak, in 4 days. I think that Taliban was there in government long before John Biden decided to withdraw. I am not here to judge the U.S. The U.S. asked us for assistance. Our intelligence stepped in. We managed to evacuate many Ukrainians and foreigners from Afghanistan. And once again, it showed that but there are professionals around, and you can't expect me to disclose all the information about the capabilities of our intelligence, of our... We haven't lost a single life out of 700. Our guys helped evacuate from Afghanistan, and in this situation we helped both US and our European colleagues. Now, our strategic partner, the United States.
Can you now rely on the United States?
I think yes.
Well, I think yes, we can, because, well, again, our relations are on a different level. Frankly speaking, we didn't hear a clear response with regard to our desire to become a NATO member or something that what Mr. Pinchuk warned me against, saying next year in NATO. No, I'm quite aware of the situation. I am not one of those Ukrainian presidents who would suggest Ukraine join an organization every year, knowing full well that it's not fit.
You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business. During a brainstorm entitled Does the US withdrawal from Afghanistan imply a loss of credibility for all US commitments and alliances, or is Afghanistan a special case? Charles King, professor of international affairs and government at Georgetown University, claimed that the US is clearing the decks in a bid to rebuild itself from the inside out. According to King, China and Russia have been quietly smiling whilst the US has been spinning its wheels in Afghanistan and Iraq, but claimed that Biden is now focused on rebuilding to ensure that American democracy does not stumble and that someone like Donald Trump never occupies the White House again. Some highlights from the session heard so far include: COVID has shown us clearly who is our friend and who is our supporter. Ukraine is not in a difficult situation. We are in a situation in which we are aware of our independence, said President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. We have been talking about climate change for as long as I can remember, but we have thus far failed to stop carbon emissions from increasing year on year, said Professor Niall Ferguson. Technology is not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is what it would take for humans to change the planet, from economics to philosophy, said Mike Barners-Lee. You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business. Behind the first day of the New Year's format, the official part came to an end. Carl Bildt closed the official part of the first day with a speech about the new reality and unity of mankind.
And now it's my great privilege to hand the microphone over to my old friend, Carl Bildt. Carl, take it away.
We are 18 months into a huge pandemic of a nature that no one of us have ever encountered. In history, there has been far worse, but it was a bloody long time ago, and that memory has been lost. And we are still, in my opinion, only half the way through this pandemic. And until everyone is safe, no one is safe. We are working through the Greek alphabet of variants. We started with Alpha, we are with Delta. There might be unpleasant surprises on the way to Omega until we get this under control. And then tech. There was a discussion on sons doing games on Facebook and their mothers being slightly surprised by that. I think that's a fairly human development that we see all over the world these days. But I mean, Facebook is yesterday's news for the new generation. They're all TikTok, which most of us here don't understand at all. And I would say that 5 years from now, TikTok might well be yesterday's news, and we are somewhere else. In the world of artificial intelligence, of synthetic biotechnology, which is going to be quite something, or quantum computing, whatever that will mean, and the different standards that are developing in different parts of the world. Geopolitics was here in our discussion. Afghanistan, I think it's too early to tell the consequences of that. But we are clearly living, Mike McFaul say we can't predict the future. I agree with that. Look back just at the decades that have passed. 1991, some of us still remember it. The fall of the Soviet Union, a bipolar world that disappeared. There was a unipolar world when there was no limits to the power and the ambitions of the United States. 20 years ago, this day, that came to a rather brutal point with 9/11, where even the most powerful nation that the world has ever seen was reminded of the very distinct limits of its possibility of shaping its own future. And then 2011, to take 10-year jumps, the sudden, I think someone said, the belief that the Renaissance had come to the Muslim world and to the Arab world. And that ended, of course, in grief and pain and refugee streams and wars and a lot of other things. And now, 2021, the global challenges that we are facing, the pandemic of a nature we have never seen in modern history, and climate change, a challenge of a magnitude far greater than I think perhaps mankind has seen for centuries. And then China, that has been there throughout the debates. And I would say the big issue that is there is whether 1870 is going to be repeated. You might ask what happened in 1870. Well, 1870 was the last big shift. It was when Great Britain ceded the position of being the number one economic power in the world to the rising power of the United States. And the question is, will in the next few years, within a decade, China, by all sorts of measurements, they already have to some extent, but by all sorts of measurements, surpass the United States as the number one economic power of the world? I think it's highly likely that will happen. And the big question that is hovering over all of these discussions is, what does that mean for us, for the new number two in that particular case, and for us that are still going to be number three or number four or number five or whatever down that particular list. So it's been a day, started badly, had some hope, some optimism, and some fairly major challenges. And I think the only proper answer to all of those questions left hanging in the air is the one that Neil gave. Let's go and get a drink. And dinner is served, I understand, in the right wing of the Arsenal. Off to that.
The YES annual meeting have become an open platform to discuss and look for new ideas and views on paths to European, Ukrainian and global development. These meetings bring together over 350 politicians, diplomats, statesmen, journalists, analysts and business leaders from more than 50 countries. The dialogue on global challenges broadens the vision on the situation inside Ukraine and the prospects for the country's development in the modern world. It is also an incentive to find common ground between countries, common interests and values. Even though YES annual meetings have been held in Kyiv since 2014, Yalta remains a symbol of powerful diplomacy and dialogue. And here at the end of the first program about the first day of the Yalta European Strategy YES. That was Radio Ukraine's weekly program Doing Business, hosted by Rodion Zhiznievsky and produced by Konstantin Lavrentyuk. Tune in every Wednesday for more.